Hey guys, welcome to the drag and drop inventory tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to create a somewhat simple inventory system that works with dragging and dropping. So just to show you how it will kind of work, let me go ahead and delete these real quick. So you'll see down here, I've created three items. One is just the base item class that all items derive from. If you try to drag that into the world, it won't. It won't let you because it's set as an abstract class, which is exactly what we want. But from this base class, you can create other classes, so other items. So I've created a sword, and you can drag that in. And obviously this isn't a sword, but I'm not an artist, so just kind of use your imagination. And I just created another random item, I called it flashlight. And again, use your imagination, pretend that's a flashlight. So if you go ahead and you press play, and if you press tab, you'll be able to open up your inventory. And there's nothing in there right now. So if you go and you walk over the sword, you'll see it picks it up, and if you press tab, you have the sword in your inventory, and you can kind of drag it around and drop it again in your inventory if you want. You can also drop it outside to drop it, and I'll show you that in a second after I pick up the flashlight. So if I pick up the flashlight, now I have them both in my inventory. Again, you can kind of drag this one around. If you drag it out of your inventory, you'll see it drops kind of in front of the player, and same with the sword. It drops in front of the player. So that's pretty much exactly what I'll be showing you how to do. There's a lot more you can do with this inventory system to make it, better. But I wanted to keep the tutorial as short as possible and try to show you like the core basics of how you would do this. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So go ahead and launch the whatever version of Unreal you're using. I'm currently on 4.24.1. And we're going to be using the third person project. So go to games, next, and we want third person, and click next. And we want blueprints. No starter content is fine. And I will call this inventory tutorial. And go ahead and create the project. All right, I'm just gonna real quick move my other project over here so I can reference it. So this is a rather complex thing to do, believe it or not. It's harder than I wish it would have to be in Unreal, but I'll try to explain it the best way that I can. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up items, because we need those before we can really have the inventory. So what we're going to do is, just like I showed you, we're going to create a base class that all of our items will derive from, and this will help with some things. So in the content directory, I'm just going to create an items folder, and then inside here, right click, go to blueprint class, and we want an actor. We will call it BP item base, so that we know it's a base class for all of our items. And if you double click on this, there's a few things we want to do in here. And since this is the base class, anything that we do in this class will get applied to all items. So we know that we're going to want all items to have some sort of geometry to represent them. So we're going to give the item base a static mesh. And we also know that all items are going to need some sort of collision so that we know when we walk over them. So we'll also give them a sphere collision. And make sure that these are both parented under this guy and that they're not like parented under each other, like exactly like I have it right here. So if you click on the static mesh, a couple things we want to change here. If you search for collision, the static mesh itself, which would be like, the actual geometry of the sword, we don't actually want to have any collision on that when it's an item. So uncheck this generate overlap events, set can step up on to no, and set this to no collision. So basically we want no collision on this whatsoever. We don't want to waste any performance trying to check collision on this thing, because that's what this sphere is for. So on the sphere, click on that, make sure collision is still typed. We can probably switch this to no for character step up on, because we don't really care about that. And I think that's probably all we need to do with the components. So The other thing we're going to need is a thumbnail, which is basically the image that shows up in the inventory. And all items are going to need that. So we're going to go ahead and add it to the base class. So over here on the left, create a variable, and I'm going to call it thumbnail. And the type that we want it to be is a texture 2D, just like that. And we can probably mark this as blueprint read only because we don't really want to change it afterwards. So once we have this, we can actually make the items themselves based off of this base class. So go back to the content directory and right click next to item base and create a new one. And instead of clicking on actor this time, we want to select our parent class to be our BP item base that we just created. So search for BP item base down here at the bottom, click on that and hit select. And we will call this BP sword and just duplicate this, duplicate and call it BP flashlight. Now obviously you can make these whatever you want. These are just the ones that I chose to use because I just so happen to have pictures for them. So if you open up sword, you'll see on the left that we have our static mesh and our sphere, and then to the right of it, it says inherited because those components are coming in from our parent or our base class, which is this item base. So they're inherited components, which is why they show inherited here. If you try to like delete them or something, it won't let you because they belong to the parent class, which is good. That's what we want. So on the right here, we just need to set up the static mesh. So since this is our sword class, we would want to select a sword model if we have one. I don't, because I'm not an artist. So we're just going to choose like some cylinder thing, like so, and then just kind of scale it down to like 0.1. There we go. Clearly this is a sword. And we can also change the like collision on it if we want to make it a little bit bigger so that it kind of fits the sword better. Maybe something like that. Okay, so the only other thing we have to do is we have to set the thumbnail for it, and the thumbnail is going to be under the class defaults, and it's right here. And remember, this thumbnail is just this variable that we set here in our base class, but we need to set it for the sword specifically. So I'm just going to go ahead and import a couple of little images I have. I'm not going to bother adding these to the description because like they're really horrible anyways. But just any item, any texture you have, just drag it in. So there's my sword, and somewhere in here I have a flashlight. There we go, flashlight. Okay, so let me real quickly change this to user interface, and we want no bitmaps, and we want UI. And do that for the other one real quick. User interface, no bitmaps, and UI. Those are just some settings that make it appear nicer when it's a UI element like it is. Okay, so now that we have our textures, we can go sword, and we'll say sword, like so. Save that, close it, and the flashlight, oops, that's not what I wanted to click. The flashlight item will change to flashlight, and then open this up, and we want to set the static mesh to whatever, like we can use, doesn't really matter, because nothing in here is going to look anything like a flashlight. Cube, sure, why not? Scale it down a little bit. There, that's our flashlight. So yeah, and like, so just to kind of elaborate on this a little bit more, so inside this flashlight class is where you would want to do like things that are specific to the flashlight, obviously. And so that's kind of the beauty of having this base class, and then you have child classes derived from it. The items can do their own specific stuff, but anything that's shared amongst the items, like the static mesh, the collision, the thumbnail, can all be in the base class, and you don't have to like redo it for each one, which is nice. All right, so now we have our items. we can just kind of drag them into the world wherever you want. So let's drag our sword and our flashlight. And if we go ahead and run it now, you'll see that if we walk over them, obviously nothing happens, but you can see they're not blocking us, which is good because we don't want items to, block us like this block would. And they're not blocking us because of what we changed in the collision settings. So that all seems to be working good. So the next thing we need to do is basically make it so that when we walk over them, we detect that, and eventually we add them to our inventory. So since they both derive from item base, it makes this process of detecting if we're on top of an item a lot easier. So if we open up our character blueprint, you just click on the character and click over here on the edit blueprint. Inside the event tick, which is not here, so right click and create the event tick. We basically want to check during each tick if we're overlapping with any items. And if we are, then again, we'll add them to the inventory. Now there's a couple of different ways like you could have done this to detect if you're overlapping with something. I know a lot of people like to use the on overlap event, like on the capsule where you right click and like on component begin overlap. They like to use this and say, is it an item? And if it is, yes, no. That would definitely work. There are some issues with that I have found in the past where it can kind of get confused, like, or not necessarily confused, but one issue I found with this when specifically talking about inventory systems is that if you use the on component begin overlap event and you have an inventory system and you walk over an item but your inventory is currently full, it will try to pick up the item because it hits this overlap begin event, but then your inventory is going to be like, hey, I don't have any room for this, so it's not going to pick up the item. If you then drop an item while still standing on top of the other item, it's not going to get this overlap begin event again, and so it's not going to try to pick it up. So it kind of creates little bugs like here and there if you're using this. So I just say like screw it, just each tick just check if you're overlapping anything because that's really easy to do in Unreal, and it saves you like some potential bugs in the future. So that's the way I'm going to do it for this tutorial. I just kind of wanted to explain that because I figured somebody would be like, hey, why don't you use the overlap event? But yeah, that's pretty much why. So to check if we're overlapping something, just get the capsule component and say get overlapping actors. And again, since they're all this BP item base, we can just say BP item base for the class filter. And so any item or any actor that derives from BP item base will be a part of this array. So we can do a for loop or for each loop. And so now we're looping over all the items that we've overlapped with. And we just want to cast it to an item. And we're not casting it to an item to check if it's an item because we know it's an item because that was the filter. We're casting it to an item because we need to get access to its class type specifically to actually I don't think we need to do this. I think we need to just say get class off of this, and this should just return to us the specific class. I just want to test that real quick because I just now realized that I can probably just do that. So I'm just going to do a quick print string. You don't have to do this to print the name out. So if we run it and we walk over it, yeah, so you'll see it prints out BP sword, BP flashlight. Yeah, okay. So yeah, quick little optimization we can do. So just say get class, and we don't want to actually print it. We're eventually going to take this class type and add it to our inventory. So that will be the next step. I'll probably start that on the next video. So stay tuned.